The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. The birth of the Buddha brought the sun of hope to a world of darkness and illuminated the whole universe. He found and transcended the cause of suffering. All beings praise this magnificent understanding. His 300 sermons are for us as rain is for trees and for grass. Just as rain causes drooping flowers to flourish, so his words touch our heavy hearts. This is from the offertory for the festival of Vesak. I'd like to start by describing what it was like in India at the time of the Buddha. He was born in the 5th century BC. It was a time when great transformations were taking place. The small republics were starting to collapse and consolidating into monarchies. Gautama was the son of a chieftain and a small tribal republic in the foothills of the Himalayas. There were 2 kingdoms forming. One was Kosala. The Shakyamuni Republic was subordinate to Kosala, whose capital was Shravasti. The other kingdom was Magadha, whose capital was Rajagaha or Rajagriha. There was a rivalry between Kosala and Magadha, which led to wars, one during the Buddha's lifetime. Also, the economy was changing from cattle ranching to agriculture. More cities were formed with trading between them, and wealthy, influential merchant class arose. The most interesting change that was taking place was in religion. There were 2 religious groups. The Brahmins, who were well established and very influential with their rituals and animal sacrifices. Their goal was to live a good life, not necessarily being good, but have a happy life, and after death to be born in heaven with Lord Brahma. They did not believe in the rounds of rebirth. The other group began shortly before the Buddha was born. They were the sramanas, the renunciates who led the homeless life. They had no fixed abode except during the rainy season when it was impossible to travel. They were seeking liberation from the rounds of rebirth. Some, possibly the majority, thought that through self-mortification they could free the soul that was being kept in bondage by the desires of the body. The other sramanas were seeking liberation through a higher meditative state. And the lay communities supported the wandering ascetics with their meager needs because they believed it would bring them merit. These wanderers would obtain their food by going into town with their alms bowl. So Gautama became a sramana, and what he did was not unusual and was an accepted part of Indian society. I'm not going to talk much about the Buddha's early life. Most of you probably know something about it. He was from the warrior class and lived a life of luxury. He had a compassionate and delicate nature and was actually not happy with the Brahmins, and especially with their animal sacrifices. He was married to the beautiful Yashodhara, and his son had just been born when he decided to leave home. His leaving home is interesting because it reflects the reason that we have all turned towards his timeless teachings. There is suffering. Why is there suffering? And is there an end to suffering? Is there something more to life than what I've known so far? Even if we're not suffering deeply, we have a sense that there's something missing. We're not at peace or content with our lives. The Buddha had everything externally that he could want, and it just didn't mean very much. He had the intuition, just as we all do, that there is something more to life. I read somewhere that he went into the city several times and saw all the suffering there: disease, old age, distress, sorrow, lamentation, all the defilements of life. He realized that nothing was lasting, all was impermanent, and he knew this would come to him and his family. What was the purpose? He didn't know what to do about it and fell into despair. I don't know if this is true or not, but he was a human being. And then he saw a wandering ascetic, a sramana, and realized there was another way. It must not have been easy for him to leave his wife and child and enter into a life that he knew nothing about. Also, he was leaving his luxurious home and physical security to enter into a life of begging for food and not having any home. He didn't know what he would find, but he had an intuition that this was the way to go, and he trusted in that. Does this sound familiar? Possibly the first meal he ate after leaving home was in the city of Rajagaha. He went into the town and obtained some scraps of food. Having come from a family where he was only served the best of food, he found the food repulsive and actually difficult to eat. But then he vowed that he would overcome this. So sometimes we think of the Buddha leaving home and, here he was the great Buddha and he just, everything was okay. But he actually, it was not easy for him and he had a lot of struggles. Probably the fact that he was leaving everything he loved was a struggle for him. You probably all know that he first went to 2 different meditation teachers, mastered their types of meditation, and found that neither led to liberation. He then became a wandering ascetic and practiced severe self-mortification for 6 years, and that got him nowhere. And he said to himself, "But by this racking practice of austerities, I have not attained any superhuman states, any distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones. Could there be another path to enlightenment?" I considered. I recall that when my father, the Shakyan, was occupied, while I was sitting in the cool shade of a rose apple tree, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, I entered upon and abided in the first jhana, or meditative absorption, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. Could that be the path to enlightenment? Then following on that memory came the realization, that is indeed the path to enlightenment. He was excessively emancipated at the time, so he bathed, ate some solid food, and sat down to meditate, making the vow that he wouldn't move until he was enlightened. He was actually very courageous to sit beneath the Bodhi tree, staying still amidst all the struggles of the self, or what was called the hordes of Mara. He gave up everything he knew, not only his wife, child, family, and home, but he had to give up all his attachments, not only to the external world he knew, but to the internal world he knew as well. And this is what we start to do as well, letting go of the intellect, the self that we've relied on, which really hasn't gotten us too far, and facing the unknown. And the Buddha showed us that this was possible. On the night of his enlightenment, in the first watch of the night, he awakened to the recollection of all his past lives. This was the first knowledge that arose in him. In the second watch of the night, he saw the passing away and reappearance of beings. He understood how beings pass on according to their actions. This was the second knowledge that arose in him. And in the third watch, he understood the Four Noble Truths. He then spent time contemplating dependent origination. This was the third knowledge that arose. He was now enlightened, and tradition has it that the first words that came to the Buddha were, "Seeking but not finding the house builder, I traveled through the round of countless births. O painful as birth ever and again. House builder, you have now been seen. You shall not build the house again. Your rafters have been broken down. Your ridgepole is demolished too. My mind has now attained the unformed nirvana and reached the end of every kind of craving." I'm going to be talking more about the Buddha's enlightenment when I talk about the third noble truth. The Buddha spent several weeks meditating under various trees in bliss and opening to and understanding many truths. On one occasion, the thought arose in him, there are 5 spiritual faculties that, when maintained in being and develop, merge in the deathless, reach to the deathless, and end in the deathless. They are the faculties of faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, meditation, and understanding. Brahma Sahampati became aware of these thoughts and came down from the Brahma world and approved of what the Buddha thought. He then explained to the Buddha that he, Brahma Sahampati, had in the past been a disciple of the Buddha Kashyapa and had understood the truth about these faculties and developed them. He was then reborn in the Brahma world, which was the highest heavenly realm, which was a happy destination. He appeared a few other times during the week that the Buddha sat meditating after his enlightenment, and always approved of what the Buddha understood. During this period, the thought arose in the Buddha that one who has no one to venerate and honor lives unhappily. However, he knew that there was no one in the world who was enlightened as he was and knew what he knew, so he could think of no one to venerate. And then the thought arose in him, but there is this law, the Dharma, discovered by me. Suppose I lived under that, honoring and respecting that. And Brahma Sahampati approved of this, saying that all the Buddhas in the past also did the same. It is not surprising then that Brahma Sahampati appeared again when the Buddha was wondering whether he should teach or not. The Buddha had spent many lifetimes as a bodhisattva before his present life. He was perfecting the paramitas and his offerings of compassion. However, after his enlightenment, he was disinclined to teach. He had the following thoughts, which I'm quoting from the book In the Buddha's Words. I considered, this Dhamma that I have attained is profound, hard to see and hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, unattainable by mere reasoning, settled to be experienced by the wise. But this population delights in attachment, takes delight in attachment, rejoices in attachment. It is hard for such a population to see this truth, namely specific conditionality, dependent origination. And it is hard to see the truth, namely the stilling of all formations, the relinquishing of all acquisitions, or I would say attachments, the destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, nirvana. If I were to teach the Dharma, others would not understand me, and that would be wearying and troublesome for me. Thereupon there came to me spontaneously these stanzas never heard before. Enough with teaching the Dharma, that even I found hard to reach, for it will never be perceived by those who live in lust and hate. Those dyed in lust, wrapped in darkness, will never discern the abstruse Dharma, which goes against the worldly stream, subtle, deep, and difficult to see. He was recounting these stories to his monks one day. He goes on to say that Brahma Sahampati knew the Buddha's mind and thought, if the Buddha doesn't teach, the world will be lost. There will be no way out of ignorance and suffering. So he went to the Buddha and said, in Magadha there have appeared till now impure teachings, devised by those still stained. Open the doors to the deathless. Let them hear the Dharma that the stainless one has found. Just as one who stands on a mountain peak can see below the people all around, O wise one, O all-seeing sage, ascend the palace of the Dharma. Let the sorrowless one survey this human breed, engulfed in sorrow, overcome by birth and old age. Arise, victorious hero, caravan leader, debtless one, and wander in the world. Let the Blessed One teach the Dharma. There will be those who will understand. Then the Buddha was moved to compassion for suffering beings. He surveyed the world with his Dharma eye and saw that there were beings with little dust in their eyes who would be easy to teach, and also those with much dust in their eyes who would be difficult. And he says to Brahma Sahampati, open for them are the doors to the deathless. Let those with ears now show their faith. Thinking it would be troublesome, O Brahma, I did not speak the Dharma, subtle and sublime. Now it's very interesting what Bhikkhu Bodhi says about the Buddha's decision to teach. He says that first there was the ascent, the movement from ignorance to enlightenment. For enlightenment to be complete, there has to be the descent, coming back to the world that one has now transcended to help other beings. And this is what our training is also about, the movement from ignorance to enlightenment, and the willingness to share what we have found and to help others as needed and with wise discernment. And this usually entails doing our own training in whatever walk of life we are in, and showing others by example that there is another way. Bhikkhu Bodhi also said that in order for the Buddha to teach, the call had to come from the world. With this, compassion would be awakened. The Buddha didn't set himself up as the great enlightened teacher who could come now and help the world. If he did, there would still be some attachment to self. He needed to be asked by Brahma Sahampati, the most powerful figure in the mundane world in India at that time. In order to teach. And as you know, the Buddha spent the rest of his life teaching and helping others in whatever way was good. Often he didn't give a discourse unless he was asked a question. And that is what our practice is to this day. As Buddhists, we don't proselytize. After the Buddha made the decision to teach, he made a vow that he wouldn't enter into parinirvana until his teachings had been firmly established and he knew they would continue into the future to help human beings and those in the heavenly realms. Now, when the Buddha first started teaching, no one had ever heard these teachings before. He was the one who found this path and discovered these teachings. So he had to actually be skillful in the way he taught in order to encourage faith in both himself and the teachings, for people to actually do this practice that leads to the cessation of suffering. They had to first grow faith. In the year after the Buddha's enlightenment, Shariputra and Moggallana, who had been searching for the truth under another teacher, discovered Shakyamuni and immediately became his disciples along with the other 250 students of the other teacher. It is said that when Shariputra, Moggallana, and the others went to see Shakyamuni, he said to his disciples, "These two friends will become the great jewels, the supreme among my disciples." And they did indeed become his chief disciples and helped the other members of the Sangha in innumerable ways. Soon after this, 6 Shakyan nobles, including Ananda and his older brother Devadatta, joined the Sangha along with their barber Upali. And during the fifth rains retreat, the order of nun was established, with Shakyamuni's stepmother, Mahaprajapati, and other Shakya women becoming the first nuns. The Buddha spoke to people in all walks of life, some with a little dust in their eyes and some with more. He always took into account the faculties, disposition, and conditioning of his listener. He was very compassionate and completely present without any obstructions. He could see things clearly and listen with an open heart. And this is one of the comments that people often make about the Dalai Lama, that he is completely present for them, as if they were the only person of importance in the world at that time. And this is one of the things we try and do is try and be present in the moment. And when we're talking to someone, try and be present with them and not be so distracted by all the myriad things that we have to do that we're only kind of half there. But the importance of just being present with that person and not worrying about the myriad things that are needed to be done. It's a good teaching. The Buddha followed the compassion and wisdom that is our true nature. I'm sure he would have sometimes encouraged his disciples in a gentle way and sometimes be firm and direct, depending on what the disciple needed at the time. I know this is how Rev. Master Jiyu taught. I felt like she held me up with her faith and kindness in the first few years I was a monk. And when she knew I had enough faith, she stopped helping me in that way, because I had to do my own training. Sometimes she was very firm with me, because that is what was needed. If gentleness didn't work, you sometimes had to be figuratively hit over the head with a 2x4 for the teaching to get through. And I think most of her disciples would hit over the head with a 2x4 one time or another. I was really struck with the way the Buddha taught beings what they were capable of understanding and able to do. He did not insist that everyone follow the strict path that leads to enlightenment, but taught each person in a way that would help that individual. He accepted all beings as they were without judgment. We can all learn from this. Reverend Master Jiyu taught us to accept everyone without judgment, that everyone had Buddha nature, and that everyone was doing the best they could. If they could do better, they would. And she would also say, if a drunk comes to the gate, treat him with respect, or I should say, treat him or her with respect. See his Buddha nature and ask him to come back when he was sober. We had someone who was drunk come to the gate recently with his partner who wasn't. They were already in the gate, so I gave him a tour, and he was really moved by what I told him about Shasta, Abbey, and Buddhism. And he was crying at times, so you never know. And when he asked if he could come back, I said, you can come back when you're sober. I'd like to tell you a few stories and teachings of the Buddha to give you an idea of how he taught and what he was like. The first one is about a lay devotee who was getting old and was worried that after he died he might be reborn in one of the lower realms of existence. He had faith in and was devoted to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, but in his busy life he wasn't able to put the teachings into practice. He was pulled in all directions. The Buddha was very kind and encouraging, and it tells him not to worry, that his devotion to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha will lead to a favorable rebirth. The second story is about Saniya and is found in the island. This story illustrates the danger of clinging to a belief in purification through a rule or vow. And from his own experience, the Buddha knew that ascetic practices did not lead anywhere. They did not lead to enlightenment. And in this story, the Buddha is firm and direct, but only after having been asked 3 times. Then Puna, son of the Koleans, an ox-duty ascetic, and also Saniya, a naked dog ascetic, went to the Blessed One. Puna, the ox-duty ascetic, paid homage to the Blessed One and sat down at one side, while Saniya, the naked dog ascetic, exchanged greetings with the Blessed One. And when this courteous and amiable talk was finished, he too sat down at one side, curled up like a dog. Puna, the ox-duty ascetic, said to the Blessed One, "Venerable Sir, this Saniya is a naked dog-duty ascetic who does what is hard to do. He eats his food when it is thrown to the ground. He has long taken up and practiced that dog duty. What will be his destination? What will be his future course? Enough, Puna. Let that be. Do not ask me that." A second time and a third time, Puna, the ox-duty ascetic, said to the Blessed One, Venerable Sir, this Saniya is a naked dog-duty ascetic who does what is hard to do. He eats his food when it is thrown to the ground. He has long taken up and practiced that dog duty. What will be his destination? What will be his future course? Well, Puna, since I certainly cannot persuade you when I say, enough, Puna, let that be, do not ask me that. I shall therefore answer you. Here, Puna, someone develops the dog duty fully and uninterruptedly. He develops the dog habit fully and uninterruptedly. He develops the dog mind fully and uninterruptedly. He develops dog behavior fully and uninterruptedly. Having done so, on the dissolution of the body after death, he reappears in the company of dogs. If he has such a view as this, by this virtue or observance of asceticism or holy life, I shall become a great god or some lesser god. That is wrong view in this case. Now there are 2 destinations for one with wrong view. I say, hell or the animal realm. So Puna, if this dog duty ascetic succeeds, it will lead him to the company of dogs. If it fails, it will lead him to hell. When this was said, Saniya, the naked dog duty ascetic, cried and burst into tears. So I think the Buddha's teaching got through to him. When Shakyamuni was getting older, he realized that he needed a full-time attendant. A number of monks volunteered, but Ananda, who didn't think he was worthy and didn't volunteer, was actually the Buddha's choice. As I mentioned yesterday, Ananda was Shakyamuni's personal attendant for the last 25 years of the Buddha's life. He was devoted to Shakyamuni. He slept nearby to guard the Buddha at night and also to be available to him. He rubbed the Buddha's back when it ached from old age. He was compassionate and skillful in all aspects of help he gave Shakyamuni. During the Buddha's last year, his chief disciples, Moggallana, entered parinirvana, and soon after, Shariputra also entered parinirvana. One thing I read said that Shariputra came to, knowing that Shakyamuni was going to die soon, came to the Buddha and asked him permission for him to enter parinirvana, because he felt like he couldn't bear the loss of Shakyamuni when Shakyamuni would enter parinirvana. So the Buddha very reluctantly gives him permission. So I don't know if this is the way it happened, but this is one thing I read. So Shariputra died soon after Moggallana, and when Ananda heard about Shariputra's death, he was completely distraught. He had really relied on Shariputra. He was a great friend to him. Then Ananda and the person who brought Ananda this news went to the Buddha. I'm going to read about this in the life of the Buddha. So here Ananda is really quite distraught, and the Buddha says to him, "Why, Ananda? Do you think that by finally attaining nirvana he has taken away the code of virtue, or the code of concentration, or the code of understanding, or the code of deliverance, or the code of knowledge and vision of deliverance? Not that, Lord, but I think how helpful he was to his fellows in the holy life, advising, informing, instructing, urging, rousing, and encouraging them. How tireless he was in teaching them the law. We remember how the Venerable Shariputra fed us and enriched us and helped us with the law. Ananda, have I not already told you that there is separation and parting and division from all that is dear and beloved? How could it be that what is born, come to being, formed, subject to fall, should not fall? That is not possible. It is as if a main branch of a great tree, standing firm and solid, had fallen. So too, Shariputra has finally attained nirvana, in a great community that stands firm and solid. How could it be that what is born, come to being, formed, and bound to fall, should not fall? That is not possible. Therefore, Ananda, each of you should make himself his island, himself and no other his refuge. Each of you should make the law his island, the law and no other his refuge. Now, when we are very attached to someone, sometimes we think, what could we do if something happened to them? But we find out that when something happens to them, we can stand up because we have the Dharma. It may be very difficult and it may be very painful, but we have this true refuge. And the Buddha is pointing this out to Ananda, that he must rely on himself. And the Dharma sustains the Dharma practitioner. And I remember a few years ago when we were having difficulties after our abbot left, who I was quite attached to. I saw that I was perfectly fine after he left. Although it was a very difficult time, I really felt like the Dharma sustained me and was there for me and all of us during that time. So we always received the help that we needed, even in really difficult times. But the Buddha I'm sure he really loved Moggallana and Shariputra. They were very dear to me, very dear to him. They were like model disciples. And I'm sure that Shakyamuni grieved at their death and really missed them. But he wasn't distraught or overwhelmed. And I'm going to read what he says to the community of monks one day. It was soon after Shariputra and Moggallana had finally attained nirvana. On that occasion, the Blessed One was sitting in the open, surrounded by the community of bhikkhus. Then, after surveying the silent community of bhikkhus, he addressed them thus: "Now the assembly seems to me as though it were empty. The assembly is empty for me now that Shariputra and Moggallana have finally attained nirvana. There is nowhere that one can look to and say, Shariputra and Moggallana are living there. The Blessed Ones in the past, accomplished and fully enlightened, each had a pair of disciples, the equal of Shariputra and Moggallana. And so will those in the future. It is wonderful, it is marvelous in the disciples how they give effect to the Master's teaching and carry out his advice, and how they are dear to the community and loved and respected and revered by the community. It is wonderful, it is marvelous in the Perfect One that when such a pair of disciples has finally attained nirvana, he neither sorrows nor laments. How could it be what is born, come to being, formed and bound to fall, should not fall? That is not possible." But I suspect that he was grieved and sorrowed, but he wasn't overwhelmed by it. And that's what training does for us. Reverend Master Jiyu said that the Zen master does grieve. And I saw that when her own cat died, Tom, she was crying at his funeral. But she also said that with this training we are not overwhelmed by these things. There is something deeper that we can rely on. But we're human beings and we have feelings. Now, in hearing what he said about Moggallana and Shariputra, my guess is that not all his disciples were so devoted, and some of them caused a lot of trouble. And in fact, Moggallana once asked the Buddha why in the early days of the community there were so many devoted disciples who quickly understood the teachings, and that and that there were very few, if any, rules at that time. And now there were many more rules and fewer monks that understood the teachings and put them into practice wholeheartedly. And the Vinaya actually came into existence because of the difficulties of some of his disciples. My guess is that the early disciples had less dust in their eyes, and they were searching for and were ready to hear these teachings and put them into practice. And as the Buddha became popular, all kinds of people joined the community, and I think he had some problems. I was reading something that Ajahn Chah said about what probably happened after the Buddha's death, because of Ajahn Chah's own experience with difficult disciples. He said that there were some who were weeping and moaning. They hadn't heard the truth yet. There were some who were saddened but were not overwhelmed. And then there were those who were glad that the strict teacher was no longer there and they could now do what they wanted. So I think all communities experience these kind of things. Not everybody loved the Buddha. The next story I'm going to tell you about is about Ananda just before the Buddha entered parinirvana. And this is stories again from the life of the Buddha. This story shows the Buddha's firmness and his great kindness to Ananda. Ananda needed both. The Buddha was looking for Ananda, and he was told that Ananda was leaning against the door bar weeping. "I am still only an initiate, whose task has yet to be completed. My teacher is about to enter final nirvana. My teacher who has compassion on me." The Blessed Ones. So the Blessed One asked for the bhikkhus to go get Ananda. The Blessed One said to him, "Enough, Ananda. Do not sorrow, do not lament. Have I not already repeatedly told you that there is separation and parting and division from all that is dear and beloved? How could it be that what is born, come to being, formed, and bound to fall should not fall? That is not possible. Ananda, you have long and constantly attended the Perfect One with bodily acts of loving kindness, helpful, gladly, sincerely, and without reserve. And so too with verbal acts and mental acts. You have made merit. Ananda, keep on endeavoring, and you will soon be free from taints." And then he tells the assembly of monks of Ananda's good qualities, and that all the Buddhas of the past and the future have attendants like Ananda. The Buddha also told Ananda that he didn't want people to worship him, to depend on him. He said to make the Dharma, the law, your guide. And this is actually what he discovered after his enlightenment, to make the law his guide, the Dharma his guide, that which he would venerate. And when Ananda asked him about venerating his remains after his parinirvana, the Buddha said, "Don't worry about that. Others would venerate the remains. Others would see to this." And he encouraged Ananda to work hard on his own training. Now I have just a couple of more stories I'd like to tell. I realize this has been going on for a long time, but these are good stories. Except I've lost my page. Oh, I know, I'm in the wrong book. This is from the disciples of the Buddha. Channa had been the charioteer of the Buddha and a servant to the Shakyan clan. He wanted to join the Sangha, and he said to the Buddha, "I too wish to enter the Sangha, but I am a low-caste Sudra." That would be what we would call untouchables now. "Probably there is no hope for me." His voice faltered, but the Buddha said, "Come, Channa, and join us." Then he told Channa how, according to the Dharma, there was no distinction of class or caste, how any man and any woman could attain enlightenment if only he revered the three treasures of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and earnestly keep the precepts, sought the way. Channa gazed at the Buddha's face as he spoke, and long after, whenever he recalled that look of profound compassion, he felt a kind of peace within himself. Now, Channa did not do very well. He became very jealous of Shariputra and Moggallana and would criticize them and do all kinds of things. And even though he was reproved by the Buddha himself and would be ashamed, and he would vow to do better, he could control his feelings for a while, and then he regressed, and he became worse and worse. And eventually he was given the respect of some lay people, and a house was built for him, and he became really can't think of the word. Well, he was overjoyed that that he was finally getting the respect that Shariputra and Moggallana received, and that he became above himself, I guess, and became very proud of himself. And his training was not really very good, but he thought very highly of himself because of how he was being treated by some of the laity. Of course, the Buddha knew of this, and he knew that Channa kept repenting and then doing the same thing over and over again. And what it says here is, Channa simply could not overcome his weaknesses. He continued to sin, repent, then break his promise to the Buddha again and again, even into old age. Shortly before the Buddha's death in Kusinara, the Buddha called his attendant Ananda to his side and instructed him that the monks of the Sangha must no longer converse with Channa under any circumstances. If he were to address them, they should not reply, but remain silent. Ananda asked why he had come to this decision, and the Buddha replied, "Channa is still deeply enmeshed in delusion. As long as I am in this world, I can correct him and keep him in check. But after I enter nirvana, that will no longer be possible. Somehow we must awaken Channa. To do that, we have to separate him from the Sangha for a time and make him take stock of himself." So when Channa heard of the Buddha's death, he came to Kusinara, where everyone was, and he asked Ananda for the details of the Buddha's death. But Ananda, who had always been so kind and friendly, did not answer, averting his eyes with a pained expression. Channa was surprised by this and couldn't understand. And then he realized that all the other monks refused to speak to him as well. And the surprise eventually turned to anger. And his thought was that they were shunning him now after the Buddha's death. So Channa angrily left on a preaching tour, but all the monks he encountered along the way would not speak to him. He had always been prone to loneliness, and such treatment was worse than any physical torture. He could not fathom the reason for this icy wall of silence. But finally he remembered that meditation might help. So he sat down to meditate. And several days passed while he was struggling with this feeling of loneliness at being abandoned by everyone. One day, shortly before dawn, a flash of realization pierced him. I've been the slave of my passions all this time. The Buddha gave us the Four Noble Truths as a means of becoming free from such selfish passions. I've been proudly preaching those truths to others without practicing them myself. I spent all my energy vilifying others. I haven't really confronted myself. A chain that had fettered Channa's heart snapped, and he realized how foolish he had been. He began also to see the reason for his fellow monks' apparent ostracism. Channa left Deer Park and went straight to the Gosita monastery where Ananda was staying. Throwing himself at Ananda's feet, he begged forgiveness. He also asked Ananda to instruct him again concerning the way to achieve true peace of mind. Ananda gazed at Channa and nodded gravely. Then he told him what the Buddha had said for his benefit just before dying. The Buddha cared so much about me, his most foolish disciple, even at the hour of his death, Channa murmured. For the first time, he realized the depth of the Buddha's compassion. You know, sometimes we just get so lost in our own feelings and emotions and our jealousy, anger, and we don't see that the truth is right in front of us. That we can practice this truth, that we can let go of our feelings and thoughts and meditate and find what we are looking for right there within ourselves. I'd like to end with a quote from Great Master Keizan's Denkoroku in his chapter on Shakyamuni Buddha. His lifelong conduct is the standard for his spiritual heirs, heiresses, and descendants. Even though he possessed the 32 major marks and the 80 secondary signs of a Buddha, he had beyond question the appearance of a dear and venerable monk, who in no way differed from other people. Therefore, from the time when he dwelt on earth through the 3 periods of the teaching, the true, the counterfeit, and the final, those for whom his Dharma is precious model themselves upon his behavior, experiencing what he experienced without even for a moment giving a thought to themselves, whilst moving, standing, sitting, or reclining. Buddha after Buddha, ancestor after ancestor, have transmitted the true law directly from person to person without interruption, as his life, as recounted above, clearly indicates. Over 49 years, at the more than 360 assemblies, his methods for pointing out the matter varied. Yet none of his stories, metaphors, and turns of phrase strayed from this principle. Homage to all in all worlds. Homage to all the bodhisattvas in all worlds. Homage to the scripture of great wisdom.